Okay, so I'll just do a quick introduction. So my name's Claire Ebury and I co-founded Pride in Leadership with Matt Howarth, who's here. Matt, can you give us a wee wave?
Hi, everyone.
So Pride in Leadership exists to elevate, connect and support LGBTQ plus business leaders and to make us more visible. So this is our second event in our new series called the Queer Business Series. And in this series, we're going to hear from LGBTQ plus business owners who are supporting other people from our community through their business activities. So they themselves are LGBT and they're helping other LGBT people. And the reason for this focus is that I've got this grandiose thought that we can do a bit of social value work, basically. If we can connect our community up with the people who can support them, then we can keep our pounds, I guess, circulating within our community and generate a bit of wealth and make a bit of a difference. So today we're going to hear from Lisa, who's going to talk to us about how menopause affects our community. We're welcoming questions throughout, so please put your questions in the chat. She's happy to be interrupted. We can sort of digress a bit, come to what you want to say, and then go back to what she talks about. And there will be more time at the end specifically for questions as well. We've enabled the subtitles thanks to charity people. And I know that there's at least one person who's asked for that. So if you want to see them and they're not appearing, then go to live transcript at the bottom. If you don't want to see them and they are appearing, then you can do the same thing and turn them off. We've got 2 events coming up. We've got an event with Professor Stephen Whittle next month. Stephen is a long-time trans campaigner and activist who transitioned in the late 70s, I believe. His story is amazing. I've spoken to him for an hour on the phone. It's a really remarkable story. So I really would like to invite you all to that if you can make it into Manchester in November. And then we've got a Christmas do as well in December. Alison's going to put links for both of these events on, and we'd really like you all to come. And that's it, I think, for my introduction. Huge thank you to charity people for all their support. Now, Lisa, we're talking about menopause. So I'm going to put my cards on the table. I'm 41 and my wife's 40. We've heard only good, positive things about menopause. I'm sure there are absolutely no downsides. Please, could you take it away and tell us the truth?
Okay, thank you very much, Claire. What we're going to do before we actually go into the presentation is we're just going to run a little survey in Zoom. So if Alison could trigger that for me, we're going to do a live poll. Yeah. And if you could all respond accordingly, I would be very grateful. Okay, are we nearly there? Are we all done?
Got results coming up, Lisa.
We have got results, yes. Okay, so what we've got is we've got 40% of our attendees saying you're not yet perimenopausal or menopausal, but wish to increase your understanding of menopause before it happens, which is actually great. And then we've got, you work for a business that has LGBTQ plus employees and wish to understand more about the potential impact of the menopause on those employees and how you can support them. That's our second most responded answer. We do have some others in there, which we'll explore later. And then interestingly, of our audience today, the least popular answer is that individuals are currently perimenopausal or menopausal and wish to understand more, which is quite unusual when I do presentations because a lot of people quite often fit into category A. But thank you for answering. And that really sort of gives us an input as to everybody's reasons for joining today. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to share my screen so we can start this presentation. Oh, a couple of people missed it. Sorry. Can everybody see my slides, first of all? Perfect. So the first thing I'm going to say for everybody on the call is I just want to caveat that I have used some statistics in here from surveys that have been done by leading menopause organisations and also some academic studies. And where I refer to the word woman or women in the slide, it is because that has been the main gender identity that's been identified within that survey or within that particular study. Okay, now I am going to touch on that later on in the presentation, but I just thought I would make that point now so that everybody is clear as to why I have used that choice of word through the presentation. Okay. So in terms of what we're going to cover today, we've got quite a lot to go through. I have the ability to talk for England on menopause, but I am conscious of time, so I will try to stick to time. I'll tell you a little bit about me and how I came to be doing this, a little bit about what I do with my business. I want to address some of the sort of preconceived ideas around menopause, and then I want to talk a little bit and help people put some context around understanding perimenopause and menopause, the definitions, why it happens, the different types, and some of those symptoms. I then want to talk about the LGBTQ community's experience of menopause, which I'm afraid doesn't make potentially happy listening. How the menopause transition might affect me as a cis heterosexual woman, if we have any on, and also as a cis lesbian woman, and also from a trans individual point of view. Then I'd like to touch on understanding and supporting your partner's menopause, some menopause demographics as to why it's important that we're all aware of it and we all have a little bit of understanding, the impact of menopause potentially on a business, how employers can become menopause friendly, and finally, why menopause doesn't have to be a difficult conversation within the workplace if, you know, an organisation is embarking on becoming a menopause friendly employer. So a little bit about me. I've had a very interesting journey to be here now today talking about menopause. I spent 20 years in the corporate world. And that first photo is me on the left in 2019 when I decided to call it a day, saying goodbye to my team of over 20 years. And I decided to leave the corporate world for one very simple reason. The business that I was running was part of a group. The group had been through a series of private equity buyouts. And finally, we were acquired by a US listed company in 2017. And after a couple of years working within that environment, I actually decided that having 20 lawyers to approve everything that I wanted to do with the business, having run it very successfully for 20 years, was a little frustrating for me. So it was time for me to leave. This second photo really demonstrates what I went to do next. I went to do a master's in exercise and nutrition science at University of Chester. And when I chose to do my dissertation, I had to do my dissertation on something that was topical to my course, something that was of interest to me, and something that was relevant to sort of general health of the population. So I chose to do my dissertation on the impact of menopause symptoms on endurance athletes, because I do participate in open water swimming, long distance triathlons. I'm not very good. I do them because I enjoy them. So that sort of ticked the two boxes. And in the course of doing that dissertation, it became very apparent to me that there was an awful lot of confusing information and misinformation out there with regards to the menopause and the perimenopause. So I went a little bit further and did some training via the International Menopause Society and also an organisation called Newsom Health Menopause Society, which some of you may have heard of, which is a doctor called Dr. Louise Newsom, who over the last 4 years has done an awful lot around bringing menopause and helping women with menopause into the wider attention of the general public. So it was quite an interesting route to end up where I am today, which is running a sort of corporate education and training business, which specifically looks at menopause at all different levels in the organization, in terms of senior leaders, managers, employees themselves, in terms of menopause education. So quite a sort of interesting journey to get where I am today. So, as I mentioned, Menopause the Right Way is my business that I set up sort of the turn of this year. I do everything from sort of menopause awareness and training via deliverable programs. I also do menopause support in terms of helping organizations put menopause policies in place. I also help organizations in terms of writing menopause support documentation, so glossaries, information on reliable evidence-based sources that can be pulled into organization intranets and stuff like that. So that's pretty much what my business does now. Now, I want to sort of address some of the assumptions and preconceived ideas that many people have towards menopause. And one thing I will say is I've become incredibly passionate about menopause since I did my dissertation 2 years ago. And one of the things that I'm incredibly passionate about is actually sort of breaking this stereotype that menopause is something that only happens to cis women who are typically white and who are typically in their late 40s or early 50s. For me, I want to take the blinkers off all things to do with menopause and help educate individuals of all ages as to, you know, what that journey may represent and how they may get through that journey with appropriate support, either medically or from their employers and their organizations. So on the left-hand side of this slide, as I say, we've got some myths here. And then on the right-hand side, we've sort of gone to address each of those. So I think if I were to do a straw poll and ask most of the attendees to the sort of seminars and presentations that I do to name a typical menopause symptoms, the majority of people come back with hot flushes. And, you know, if you've not been through the menopause yourself or experienced menopause symptoms, I think this is the one symptom that is synonymous with menopause that most people can actually name. Well, the reality is that there are actually, the last academic paper I saw, up to 42 different symptoms that can be linked with the perimenopause and menopause itself. We'll go into those in a bit more detail later. Age. Now, again, preconceived media stereotyping, preconceived ideas, and my own, I will freely admit, before I became involved in menopause, was that this was something that typically impacted on individuals over the age of 45 and, you know, more than likely, probably early 50s. Again, there are lots of scenarios where individuals of all ages can be affected, from you know, young girls in their teens to individuals in their 20s, 30s and early 40s. And again, we'll touch on those shortly later on in the presentation. The media has a lot to do with how people perceive menopause. And again, here, you know, one of the assumptions was that it only affects cis women. Well, actually, from a symptomology point of view, it does affect cis women, but also trans individuals will experience to a lesser or greater degree some of the symptoms and some of the menopause process itself. But, you know, there is a lot of evidence now to actually show that, you know, when an individual goes through the perimenopause, it doesn't just impact upon them, it impacts upon family members, partners, children potentially, and also potentially work colleagues. It's a natural transition Well, not necessarily. Menopause can be surgically or medically induced. It can come on as a result of a couple of other medical conditions, which I'll touch on later. We should just get on with it. Easier said than done. Over a quarter of women actually experience serious debilitating symptoms that become increasingly difficult for them to manage as they go through that journey. It's the same for everyone. You know, my mum went through it, your mum went through it, we all just got on with it and dealt with it. Actually, it's not. Every individual's experience is completely different. You could have two identical twin female sisters who could have very different perimenopause and menopause experiences. There is a sort of preconceived myth that's not on here, is that, you know, you'll go through the menopause at the same age as your mother, and your mother is a good barometer for how your menopause journey will actually take place and progress. Again, that's more of a sort of urban myth as opposed to a reality. It is different for everybody, and there are all sorts of factors that will come into play other than just genetics. So I've been using the term perimenopause and menopause interchangeably, and I tick myself off when I realise that I'm doing it, because that is something that's very common in the media and articles that we read. So I just really want to clear up what the difference between the two terms actually is. So perimenopause, this is the transition time between menopause symptoms starting and when periods completely stop. It can begin anywhere between the age of 36 and 49. It can, I'm afraid to say, last up to 10 years. But typically for Caucasian Western women, perimenopause is usually 4 to 5 years. I have spoken with some people who say they, you know, flew through perimenopause. They can remember experiencing a couple of symptoms and, you know, hey presto, it was all over within about 6 months. Those individuals, in my experience to date, tend to be the exception rather than the norm. And if you get that type of perimenopause, then you are incredibly lucky. And, you know, I'm really pleased for you as an individual if that's how your perimenopausal journey goes. The typical age for perimenopausal transition is 47 and a half. So, you know, as I say, it can start as young as 36, it can start as late as 49, but typically the average age is 47 and a half. Now, menopause itself actually only covers clinically or medically 1 day. So once you have gone 12 months and 1 day without a period, you are actually in menopause. The minute you get to 12 months and 2 days, you're technically post-menopausal. Now, what we found in today's world is that the term postmenopausal really isn't used very often, and the descriptors are normally perimenopausal or menopause, and very little in between, really. Menopause itself, the average age is 51, but it can occur anywhere between 45 and 55. And if you actually go through or have your menopause between the age of 40 and 45, you're deemed to be going through an early natural menopause. So just wanted to sort of clear up some of the terminology around perimenopause and menopause itself. Now, again, this is a slide taken from a presentation by a chap called Joel Evans, who specifically focuses on women's health and the hormonal axis, hence the reference to female hormones here through a life cycle. But I do think this is a really good slide that sort of demonstrates quite clearly what is happening to your hormones as you are premenopausal and then become perimenopausal and then go into postmenopausal menopause itself. So estrogen and progesterone is ticking along at quite a steady level once you've gone through puberty. But then once you enter into sort of the perimenopausal phase, progesterone itself tends to decline fairly steadily and consistently until the end of menses is reached, and at which point both estrogen and progesterone have flatlined. The issue we have, and the main cause of our fluctuating perimenopausal symptoms, is this crazy line that is representing estrogen. Your estrogen levels throughout perimenopause are fluctuating wildly, so much so that the NICE guidelines of 2015 actually advocate that if an individual is perimenopausal, GPs don't bother taking blood. And the primary reason for that is because you could take blood in the morning for an estrogen level, you could take blood later on in the afternoon, and that estrogen level could have changed throughout the course of the day. And it is that estrogen level that is the biggest driver of some of the symptoms that are typically experienced in perimenopause. The main reason for that is because every major organ in your body, from your brain to your lungs to your liver, has estrogen receptors cells within them. So if you have an organ that has estrogen receptors cells within them, and your estrogen levels are all over the show, it doesn't take a genius to work out why that can then correlate to different types of symptoms that you may be experiencing as you go through perimenopause. Now, I did say I would touch on different types of menopause, and this is something, again, that I do really stress with all my audiences, so that we can sort of break this barrier of it being a natural menopause experienced by solely cis women who are in their late 40s and early 50s. So we have premature ovarian insufficiency. And as I mentioned, this can happen to cis women who are in their teens, their 20s, even their 30s. And that is why, I do strongly reference this point about it not just being something that impacts upon people in their late 40s. So premature ovarian insufficiency is where an individual has comprised ovarian function, i.e., the ovaries are no longer producing normal levels of estrogen that would be associated with, a cis woman who is going through typical menstrual cycles. This can lead to either a regular or a complete ceasing of the monthly menstrual cycle, which in turn can trigger different perimenopausal symptoms based upon the levels of estrogen that the ovaries are still actually producing. So, as I mentioned, this brings into play pretty much every cis woman that we have in our universe, in effect. Surgical and medical menopause can happen, or has happened at any age. In terms of surgical menopause, this can be associated with hysterectomies, either a full or partial. It can be associated with oophorectomies, which is a removal of the ovaries. And pretty much if either of those operations are had, an individual will be put into an immediate menopause when they come around from them. And again, there are many reasons for individuals to have that hysterectomy or that oophorectomy, but it does end up with an immediate menopause. The other reason here is radiotherapy and chemotherapy. Again, a great example of this is a friend of mine's 21-year-old granddaughter, who 2 years ago at 19 was diagnosed with bone cancer in her femur bone. Christie's were fantastic. They talked to her about her cancer. They talked to her about her treatment. They helped her freeze her eggs. They told her about the long-term diagnosis, lots of lifestyle and holistic issues. The one thing that she wasn't prepared for or even forewarned about was the fact that having gone through radiotherapy and chemotherapy, she would ultimately go into a premature menopause. That was incredibly difficult, as I'm sure you can imagine, for a 21-year-old woman to have to deal with, and struggled getting the support that she needed to help her to be able to cope with that, both from a physical and psychological standpoint. And then obviously in terms of the trans community, varying degrees of hormone therapy in terms of managing that hormone therapy throughout the course of their lives, or moving on to that hormone therapy, or even having to come off that hormone therapy for any kind of medical procedure. These can all result in perimenopausal symptoms starting to become a factor for an individual.
Lisa, we've had a quick question from Carol about whether there's a link between junk food and menopause.
Whether there's a link between junk food. Well, it's a very good question. Lifestyle in terms of exercise and nutrition can shape your perimenopause. Once you get to menopause and you've at the point where your hormones have settled and this sort of conditions then start becoming related to old age, it becomes more difficult to look at exercise and nutrition as a way of helping you through it. So what they say is you're actually looking at lifestyle per se in terms of, reduced levels of stress, good mental health, high quality diet or better quality diet, and obviously exercise will all help contribute towards that sort of perimenopausal journey and the management of it. Does that help?
Does that answer your question, Carol?
Yes, it helps. Since I have menopause, I changed my diet dramatically to improve and to improve my health on a daily basis, and it works. Personally, it works. I know it's not easy because we are in a life that we have invitation for pizzas and things like that, but honestly, I try to avoid it as far as possible once I'm home, and definitely it has a good impact on the menopause and all what it is about menopause, personally.
Yeah. Thank you for that.
Thank you for your
big problem.
I want to just touch on endometriosis, because this is actually a condition that inflicts about 1 in 100 cis women, and this is actually a very, very debilitating condition, where the cells that are similar to the ones that actually line the lining of the womb in terms of the uterus actually develop outside of the uterus itself. So what that in effect means is that as somebody will go through their monthly menstrual cycle, any discomfort or issues that they will experience as a result of the lining of the womb being shed is replicated in those cells outside of the womb. So typically you might find them anywhere around the sort of abdomen area. That's the most sort of common location. Now, the trouble with endometriosis is it's quite difficult to diagnose, and it does take quite a long time to get a diagnosis. So you may have individuals who have had very, very heavy periods, and that's all they've known, and very painful and very heavy periods that actually finally get a diagnosis of endometriosis. Now, the treatments for this are either medication or surgical, normally a hysterectomy. And typically, if somebody does have surgical treatment for endometriosis, they are obviously put into an immediate or premature menopause as well. So we've got our scenarios there, which, as I say, sort of I feel very strongly about in terms of breaking these stereotypes of age and typical perceptions of what a menopausal woman actually looks like. So I mentioned symptoms. There are actually up to 42, and again, Something I feel very strongly about is if you know the range and diversity of those symptoms and you are aware that they can start as early as sort of 36, 37, then by actually tracking and having awareness of those symptoms, it can help you in a couple of ways. Firstly, it stops you from thinking you're going absolutely mad or you've got, early onset dementia. Or that, the stress of your job has got to a point where you really can't cope with it. And secondly, if you do track your symptoms, and I will send Claire to distribute a really good symptom tracker that's available via an app. If you do track your symptoms and you track them for, 2 to 3 months, you can actually, if you decide you want to get medical intervention for help for these symptoms, most of the symptom tracking apps allow you to print off a report that you can actually take to your GP and talk through and discuss with them at length. So some of the symptoms that I've sort of put the little illustrations on this slide include increasing weight, specifically around the sort of lower abdomen and belly area, something that I myself have suffered with. If you're a migraine sufferer, typically they might become more frequent. They might also become longer. The good one of brain fog, again, something I personally suffered with a lot and to a certain extent still a little bit today. Loss of libido, lacking of energy, heartburn, dry eyes, inability to sleep, changes in your monthly cycle, irritability, anger, inability to concentrate, increased numbers of UTIs. And these, as I say, are sort of some of the more common symptoms.
Lisa,
now, yes.
What is brain fog? How's it different from not being able to concentrate?
Okay, so the easiest way I can describe it, Claire, and hopefully this will make you all laugh, is as I started going through the perimenopause, I came home one day and I'd been home about half an hour and my wife came in and said to me, "Why have you put the car keys in the freezer?" And I said, "I haven't." And she said, "Yes, you have, because you came back in with the car last." And I had no recollection of doing it. I'd done it without even realizing what I was doing, and B, I had no recollection of doing it. So that brain fog can be anything from losing words in the middle of a presentation, doing things and not actually knowing you've done things. It's quite difficult to explain, but those are some of the scenarios that I've given you. So, another thing I did was my wife came to me and said, "Lisa, why is the dog biscuit scoop in the cutlery drawer?" I was like, I don't know. Did you put it there? "No, Lisa, you fed the dogs this morning." So it's kind of doing things that are just not things that you would normally do, or, doing things that you would normally do that you've got no recollection that you do, or you do them slightly wrongly, or you do them slightly differently than you may have done them before.
Yeah, and I can see why you would compare that a little bit, or you could, to early onset dementia or cognitive impairment or something like that, because it's I mean, one of the other ones that I had was, I was very well known in my business for knowing everybody's name who worked for me and being able to link names to faces. And through my professional career, that was one thing that most people I met would acknowledge that I was really, really good at. And, in my mid-40s, I would walk into a room, see somebody who had worked with me for 10 or 15 years, and I couldn't think of their name. And I would look at them blankly and think, I know who you're married to, I know what your kids do, or, how many kids you've got, I know what your dog's called. Can I, for the life of me, remember your name? No. So these are the sort of symptoms that can creep up on you quite easily. And, some individuals get them very mild. Some individuals may only get, a couple of the symptoms. Whereas, I found with myself,
as I went from sort of being 45 up to 50, my symptoms got progressively worse and more symptoms started to come about for me until I decided what it was that I wanted to do about them. So, you know, it is something that I feel really strongly about in terms of being aware of all of these different types of symptoms. And at the time, I just put it down to pressure of job, an ever expanding business, more employees. I just didn't have the knowledge to sort of associate these with the perimenopause. So I want to touch on our community's experience of menopause. And I can, again, you know, and I'm sure some of our attendees today will probably recognize what I'm saying here. Unfortunately, the media representation, the medical dealings around menopause, and also the research around menopause itself has a completely heteronormative standpoint. So, you know, if you see menopausal women represented in the media, on the TV or in the papers, you know, it's usually a white, middle class, quite attractive looking woman who's probably in her late 40s or early 50s, and she's got a fan in her hand. Yeah. The media doesn't tend to look any further than that particular image. So we don't see menopause represented in, you know, women of color. We don't see the menopause in the media represented with the LGBTQ community in that sense. When it comes to our GPs and the medical profession, we also, and I can speak to this, it's also completely heteronormative in terms of our experience of, you know, going to talk to our GPs pretty much about most women's health issues, to be fair, or most, you know, trans health issues as well, in terms of how it might be approached. So I'm sure if I did another, you know, straw poll and I said to you, how many have been to your GP and your GP's tried to talk to you about contraception, or tried to talk to you about, you know, your sexual relationships on the assumption that you are in a heterosexual relationship. Now, you know, I'm not shy in retiring, and I cannot tell you how many times I have told various different partners in my GP practice that no, I don't need contraception. And the main reason I don't need contraception is not because I'm trying for a baby, it's because I'm actually gay. And I've had that conversation so many times. Now, I'm quite lucky in that the GP I now get to see, by pure coincidence, turns out to be a friend of a mutual friend and has actually bumped into myself and my wife near where we live. So when I see that particular GP, she has now finally registered that I am gay. And no, I don't need help with contraception. And some of the suggestions that she has for me with regards to dealing with my menopause are not options that I want to pursue. When it comes to the research, again, we are completely disadvantaged as a community. In preparing for this presentation, I went out and I searched all of the academic papers I could possibly find that might have used lesbians or trans individual as part of their research study in relation to the menopause. And I literally found 4 papers, 4 academic papers, and they were very, very loosely referenced in terms of the LGBTQ plus community. So I'm afraid in terms of, you know, the LGBTQ plus experience of menopause, it isn't great at the moment from my personal experience and also from the anecdotal information that I see presented to us. And that's something, again, that I feel very, very strongly about. And I'll touch a little bit later on my engagement with an organisation called Newsom Health to hopefully try and change that. In terms of the impact of those symptoms on cis women, I think what's come out from this survey, which was done by the British Menopause Society in 2016, and all the recent surveys more or less illustrate this as well. I just want to pick up on 3 main slides here, which is, firstly, somewhat surprisingly, 50% of the women interviewed in this survey had said that they were a little surprised to find that their menopausal symptoms had impacted upon their home life. 50% of the women interviewed said that their menopausal symptoms had impacted upon their sex life. A third of the women interviewed in this survey had said that the menopausal symptoms had impacted upon their work life. And the other key thing to come out of this survey was that 42% of these women had experienced on average 7 symptoms, but that their menopause symptoms were actually much worse than they had anticipated that they would be. So I think those are sort of 3 very enlightening statistics here in terms of, preparedness and awareness about what the perimenopause and the menopausal journey might actually mean for you as a sort of cis, straight or lesbian woman, basically. Now, as I mentioned, it was incredibly difficult to get information specifically relating to trans individuals here in terms of accurate information. So I've tried to split this into 2 areas, and, from the information I was able to find, it does assume that the individual is taking gender-specific hormones. And obviously, for any trans individuals we have on this particular call today, if you have different experiences, I would very much like to hear about them, and obviously we can take that offline. If you feel there's anything in this slide that you would like to comment on at the end, again, we would welcome that. But in terms of trans women, typically they might take estrogen, progesterone and testosterone blockers. Now, from the information that I could find, for trans women, there is the possibility that they may experience menopause-like symptoms if those hormone treatments are reduced or stopped as a result of those increased levels of estrogen via the estrogen and progesterone that would be taken actually falling. And again, as I mentioned, because you have estrogen receptors in all cells of your body, in all the major organs, then obviously that will play a role in influencing the symptoms that might be experienced. In terms of trans men, it's usually testosterone and estrogen blockers that would be provided from a medical standpoint. If a trans man has not had any surgical intervention, i.e. they've not had their ovaries removed, then they may experience menopause symptoms as they reach the point where their ovaries are no longer producing estrogen themselves. And obviously, using estrogen blockers, there may well be more reduced type symptoms experiencing as a result of taking those estrogen blockers. But what I couldn't find was any sort of medical evidence to demonstrate how taking testosterone may play off against those symptoms, or as a result of sort of taking the estrogen blockers as well. I think in terms of going through the menopause transition, what sort of key things can we do to offer support to our partners? And I can tell you now, this is, please not do as I did, rather do as I say, because when my wife went through the menopause about 10 years ago, I knew nothing about it, and I would hardly call myself a supportive, understanding partner. I'm just very glad that she was a supportive and understanding partner for me. So I think the first thing that we should all do is to educate ourselves around the symptoms and the potential impact of those symptoms on your partner or your sister or your family member or your friend. We should be prepared to talk and listen, and that is vitally important in all different aspects of relationships, but particularly for somebody who is going through this phase in their life. We do need a lot of patience. Moods are all over the show in terms of low mood, anxiety, irritability, frustration. So it's really good to exercise patience and actually realize that this isn't necessarily about you. It's the other person that's having the difficult time. And more often or not, it may be that things that you haven't changed, but actually just because of where your partner is, you could be driving them crazy. So again, you know, my wife is the most easygoing, mild-mannered person you could possibly wish to meet. But when she went through the menopause, all she said to me is, I could absolutely kill you. You've become incredibly irritating. You haven't changed. It's me and how I feel about you at this point. But Lisa, I could literally kill you. So could you please just go away on business again, which I happily did. We should offer to help in any way that we can, because, you know, even the small things, even the small offers of help enable us to provide support to our partner. And I think one of the things that, you know, we can't do is to actually assume that, you know, our partners are going to feel in a particular way or are going to act in a particular way. So it is a lot about educating yourself, talking and listening, showing patience, and trying to provide, you know, support. I just want to touch on these demographics because I think they're really, really important. You know, in the UK at the moment, women, cis women are the majority, not by much, but, you know, we are there. We represent 51% of the UK population. But I think, you know, so obviously that is a very big percentage of the population that are going to be, you know, going through the perimenopause or even be menopausal as we speak. In terms of, you know, Britain or UK Limited, if you can imagine the country was an organisation, we currently have and represent, we have about 15.5 million cis women employed, which represents actually about 47.6% of the working population. But, you know, the two things that I really want to focus on here from an organisational standpoint, and I've put in the ages of perimenopause and menopause above just to remind us, is that as it stands at the moment, either in full-time employment, part-time employment, contractors or self-employed, sorry, not excluding self-employed, we have 5.3 million women who are of perimenopausal age. And we have 4.5 million women who are in effect aged over 50 plus, so who will be imminently menopausal or who are menopausal. So what that means from the employer's standpoint is that we can't ignore the menopause. You know, as an organisation, obviously there will be variables in terms of the industry that business operates in and the demographics of its workforce in terms of cis women, non-binary, trans individuals, and obviously men. But, you know, organisations cannot afford to ignore the menopause and the menopause experience of its employees. Again, I'm conscious of time here, Claire, and I do want to open this up. So I'm perhaps not going to talk to this other than to say that this slide really represents some of the issues around employees' experience of menopause and how it impacts upon their work. So, yeah, so in this survey, 99% of women said that their symptoms had impacted upon their work. But some of the key takeaways from this slide is the staggeringly scary statistic that 59% of the individuals questioned had taken time off work, 18% or so had been off for more than 8 weeks. And the really sad statistic for me here is that over 50% of the women in this survey had resigned or taken early retirement as a result of their perimenopausal symptoms. So a staggering statistic. You know, when it comes to the organisational impact, you know, these symptoms are going to be leading to potentially decreased performance of the individuals that are suffering from them. It's not uncommon for absences to occur as a result of perimenopausal and menopausal symptoms, which can ultimately lead in increased staff turnover. And that's twofold. One, the individuals themselves may decide they don't want to be taken down a disciplinary route, so they resign or hand their notice in. Or secondly, the disciplinary route is pursued by the employer because the individual doesn't actually explain that they are struggling with their menopausal symptoms. And from the employer's perspective, that leads to an increased staff turnover. And you're losing individuals who are typically long serving, typically have a lot of life experience and a lot of job experience. So from the employer's point of view, that isn't great, because in a study done in 2014, Oxford Economics determined that the cost to an employer of replacing an employee that's left is about £30,000, and that isn't even a particularly senior individual. And that takes into account recruitment, interviewing, advertising the job, placing the candidate getting up to speed in terms of taking 6 to 9 months to be fully familiar with the job of the individual that they have replaced. So, if we follow this all the way through, it's very clear that the menopause itself and the impact upon menopausal individuals from an organisational standpoint cannot be ignored. So what can employers do? Well, they can look at culture, they can work to become a menopause-friendly employer, a menopause-supportive employer. It has to come from the top, it has to come from senior leaders and senior managers, and they can change that culture by, in effect, raising awareness of the menopause within the business place, raising awareness within managers, within male employees. They can provide support in terms of policies and practical steps that can be taken. So, a menopause policy, a formalized menopause policy, putting sanitary products in the toilets, providing the option for employees to request desk fans to deal with hot flushes, etc. And they can put on menopause events in terms of, informal pop-in type events or more formalized training of the like that I can offer. I mentioned some of the practical steps. Again, I'm conscious of time, so I won't go through all these, but they're fairly straightforward. There's nothing enshrined in employment law yet with regards to menopause policies and practical steps that employers can do. I don't foresee it being that far away, but at the moment, this is all about good practice and sort of protecting the organisation. Again, sort of, here where a menopause policy should go to. And then, why menopause shouldn't be a difficult conversation. Well, the demographics prove that, organisations need to be having these conversations simply by the age group and the gender of the UK limited workforce, as it were. It's always great to create a supportive and inclusive culture, whether that be around menopause, whether that be around mental health, whether that be around LGBTQ issues. And it helps with talent retention and attraction. In terms of the who, well, any line manager who has menopausal individuals potentially within their teams should be educated about how to hold this conversation. And along with HR professionals who very often provide the first line of support or the first line of discussion for individuals within the business about their menopause symptoms. And last but not least, this sort of goes back to encouraging employees to talk and explain their circumstances, having open and non-judgmental conversations where, the manager or the HR individual listens actively, engages with that employee, and obviously is empathetic. And obviously one of the key things here is to avoid inappropriate responses. That might be something along the line of, don't just turn around and say, well, my partner's menopause was easy or my wife's menopause was easy, so isn't everybody's the same? So I know I've gone through a lot and I'm really sorry because I've overrun. Sorry, Claire.
You're okay. You've not gone over your time. We've still got 5 minutes. I've got a question from me first of all. Are you happy for us to share these slides afterwards, Lisa?
Definitely. Yeah.
So we can all check back on all the stats that we sort of flew through. But Andy asked a question about the stat about the business stats.
Yeah.
I wonder if you could just flick back to those, because Andy's question was, is there a breakdown between resignation and early retirement? How often does it lead to permanent retirement?
That is a very good question, Andy. And there are some stats which were actually released yesterday, I believe, from Newsom Health in conjunction with sort of International Menopause Day. I can get those stats and provide it on a sort of follow-up link on LinkedIn for people. Yeah, I can do that.
Okay, let's do that. Alex made a comment.
Thank you, Lisa. Thank you.
Alex made a comment that, hold on, what's Alex's comment? I honestly don't know how my wife coped with me at the start of perimenopause. So Alex, I don't know if you want to come on and share a bit more of that. How bad were you?
Oh, fairly bad. Yeah, I had migraines really badly. It's something that I get anyway, and they got really bad, and combined with being really quite irrational and unreasonable, I was having a lot of rage, and it not being handled in the best way by me. Luckily, it was by her. I had one day where I had a migraine in the night come on, and she woke up and I asked her to go downstairs and deal with the pets instead of, normally it's me, which she did without speaking to me because I had a migraine. I then got unreasonably upset that she hadn't spoken to me and came downstairs in floods of tears going, "Is this it? Are you just not speaking to me now?" And I don't think she really knew what to do, but it was shortly after that we realised what was going on.
Oh God,
yeah,
sounds awful. That stat that you had up, Lisa, saying 50%, I can't quite remember exactly what it was, but 50% of women have really bad. If you're in a same-sex relationship, then that might be one out of two of you. I think that's well, quite a peculiar setup, really.
I mean, it is very difficult in a same-sex relationship. As I say, please don't do as I did, do as I say, because my poor wife, when she went through the menopause, I was just oblivious to it. And apart from her permanently wanting to kill me, she would be the first to admit she had a relatively quick menopause and relatively symptom-free, apart from the sort of change in her personality in terms of, you know, irritability. But yeah, you know, if you are in a same-sex relationship and you're both going through it at the same time, it has the potential to be incredibly difficult. And it's hard enough when you go through it at separate times, as you know, we just heard.
Are there any more questions? Because we're coming to the end of our time, and I think everyone will start disappearing if we don't wrap up now. Is there any urgent questions? I know that you've all been introduced. You've got links to Lisa if you want to go directly to Lisa with any questions. I'll do a follow-up email with these slides plus links to the other things that Lisa's said that she'll share with us as well, to everybody that we've got you know, email addresses for. Please do sign up for Pride in Leadership, prideinleadership.co.uk. Please come to our next two events, November and December, and yeah, we very much appreciate you turning up today, so thank you very much.
Claire, can I just add, there's some of the chats, can't get my words out, some of the questions come into the chat, yeah? So one's about brain fog with perimenopause and fibromyalgia. What I'll do, if you all go to my LinkedIn page, by sort of tomorrow, I will put some links into some good research around those specific questions, okay?
That's amazing, thank you. Sorry, I missed that question there.
Just a picture of it to make sure I get it. Unless Alison can tell me, we will keep copies of the questions in here. Alison, do the questions, is there a way of keeping the questions from the Zoom session?
Yes, I can see the chat, Jess, yeah.
Perfect. Would you be able to send me a summary of what questions are in there? Then I can address them via LinkedIn by sort of tomorrow, the latest tomorrow lunchtime.
Yeah.
That's super. Thanks so much, everybody. See you again at the next event.
Thanks, Claire. Thank you very much for letting me waffle on.